Okay, we need to immediately establish a difference between these two phrases, okay? Obsessive compulsive disorder is a disorder that is listed in the DSM-5, right, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, that that defines all of the mental disorders that we deal with. Obsessive compulsive disorder is a very specific thing. We know that it happens in parts of the brain that have to do with memories, the input of sensory information, things like that. In obsessive compulsive disorder, what you will see are kind of what they call odd or eccentric kind of behaviors. People with full-blown OCD tend to do behaviors that seem to be irrational. Why would you do that? If any of you have ever seen, for example, the movie As Good as It Gets, Jack Nicholson's character in that movie plays an obsessive compulsive. And there are several scenes where he does these behaviors. For example, he has to flip the light switch on and off 7 times before he leaves or enters a room. Okay. When he gets up in the morning and he puts his feet on the floor, he has to cross his foot back and forth across his slippers 7 times before he can actually put his feet in the slippers. Right. So there are things that, because what happens in obsessive compulsive disorder's mind is the need for balance, and it's kind of their way of balancing the world. They tend to have and latch onto, and we don't understand why yet, but they tend to latch onto repetitive behaviors, and the repetition tends to take on a certain number that is significant in some way to them that they can't explain to you, and we don't really know where it comes from, because I have seen obsessive compulsives do it 3 times, do it 6 times, do it 7 times, do it 10 times. There's something about the number of times that clicks in their brain that is enough times to satisfy that. Okay, let's talk first then about the 2 words, and let's define these. So let's talk about the obsessions are the thoughts, the thoughts that drive the train, that compels the person to need to be participating in these behaviors. Okay, and then compulsions are the behaviors that satisfy that obsessive thinking, whatever those are. Okay, so obsessions are the thoughts, compulsions are the behaviors that we see that are used to satisfy those thoughts. Okay, obsessive compulsive disorder is something that, for whatever reason, the person seems to find the world kind of in imbalance or disorder, and it's their way of restoring order and balance to the world. If the world is not balanced well enough, it makes them really, really anxious. Okay, and they can get frustrated, and they can have outbursts, and they can have real odd behavior responses to things. You're going, what is going on here? Okay, so there's an odd, eccentric kind of flavor to what is considered real OCD or obsessive compulsive disorder. And I really need to point this out because I'm really tired of people running around abusing this term, for people who, don't like messes and like everything in their place and like order, and they run around and go, oh, I'm just so OCD, I'm so OCD. That's what, no, you're not, okay? You do not have obsessive compulsive disorder. That's another whole kind of thing. What you actually might be dealing with is this other thing over here, which we call obsessive compulsive tendencies. Now, these tendencies are the tendencies to, again, do things like organize and try to insert some control into an environment where the individual may have felt in some way that they were out of control of themselves or their life or the situation at some time. Okay, often people who develop obsessive compulsive tendencies sometimes experience trauma, especially earlier on in life. When trauma occurs, there's a very strong awareness that there wasn't really anything you could have done to stop it, for the most part. Okay, it couldn't have been, it wasn't under your control. So a lot of times that kind of triggers the deep amygdala part of the brain to kind of respond to the need, if you will, because there's the need to control kind of stems from the survival mechanism of any organism. Okay, every organism, strives to survive. Control, however, especially in psychological terms, man, I work with clients all the time. Dude, control is an illusion. Okay, because the only thing in this world you really actually have control over is yourself. So trying to, you can't really control another person. You can try to manipulate them, right? But you can't actually control them. They can choose to do or not do what you want them to do. So the only real control you have is over yourself. So what happens then when one experiences some very out of control situation, they retreat to that space and go, okay, if the only thing I have control over is myself, then I'm going to exert some control there. And so it can manifest itself in a multitude of kinds of behaviors. I'm going to shop the way I want to. Okay, I'm going to gamble and spend my money the way I want to. I'm going to eat the way I want to. And so oftentimes these non-substance related addictions are developed obsessive compulsive tendencies that are often, not always, but often in response to control issues. Okay, and it often stems from earlier trauma and things. Again, doesn't have to. There are also some, miswirings, if you will, in the brain that someone can be born with or can happen at birth or whatever, like lack of oxygen can create some parts of the brain, again, to respond a little differently to the world and to feel that anxiety. And the only way that anxiety gets settled or diminishes in any way is through some behaviors. Obsessive compulsive tendencies, hear me say, do not look odd or eccentric. They're often things that many people do. Okay, people gamble. There's a whole social kind of network about, gambling and what social gambling is and some of that kind of stuff. Not everybody becomes a problem gambler, right? Everybody shops. Not everybody becomes a problem shopper. So it's often associated with things that are more common behaviors. And so the question becomes, at what point does it really begin to look obsessive compulsive? Okay, is that a good enough conversation to help us kind of sort that out? Because I really want us to understand that these non-substance related addictions are not forms of obsessive compulsive disorder. And I think we do an injustice to people who actually do have OCD by lumping all this stuff together. Because clinically, you treat these things very differently. Okay, so it really, really matters that we get the diagnosis correct. And so if you guys are going to be out there working with people like this in the service field, or to be able to understand how to look at these things, to understand that these obsessive compulsive tendencies are kind of driving their train, but when they see examples of people who have obsessive compulsive disorder, and you can go look up a bunch of YouTube videos or whatever of people who live with obsessive compulsive disorder, and you'll see images of things being very odd and eccentric, and people going, why do they need to do that? What is that? Which is very different than someone with a shopping addiction, what we would call a shopping addiction, okay? Cool? All right, that being said, what the book does then is the book breaks this down into 5 of those non-substance related addictions. We're going to talk about gambling, we're going to talk about shopping, we're going to talk about electronic devices, we're going to talk about eating disorders, and we're going to talk about sexual addictions. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. How many people do I have here? Oh, good, I have 15. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. All right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to randomly put you in four groups, okay, because sexual addictions is just one of those things that the book doesn't do as good a job with that as I would like for it to. So I'm going to do that one myself. We'll add that on and we'll have that conversation. But I'm going to use the first 4. I'm going to break you guys into groups. I'm going to visit each group and tell you which one of those 4 topics your group will have, okay? And there are some other specific directions depending upon which topic you have. And what your group is going to be tasked to do is this, ready? In each of those sections, so hopefully you already read this, and your group then is going to focus on that section in the book. in in each of those sections, there's a basic kind of definition for the disorder you're going to talk about. So I want you to, and at least one person in the group needs to either write up or eventually type up the group's responses. So everybody's name goes on the paper, and the definition, and then what I'm going to tell you next, all needs to be put on typed on this paper, and you need to submit it to me in the as a course message attachment. Okay, put it in the course messages and attach it to me. So first thing you do in the group is figure out who's going to be your scribe. Okay, who's going to do that? But everybody's name goes on it to make sure everybody gets points credit. Then you're going to send it to me in a course message, and then I'm going to use them next week when we get back together and have the whole conversation together. Okay, I'll pull up your group's paper and we'll talk about what your points are on the paper. The second thing you're going to do after you find a definition, and what I want you to think about and brainstorm about is, I want you to create a list of behaviors. Hear me say behaviors, not thoughts, not psychological things, but behaviors. What can I see somebody doing that tells me this, shopping or this gambling or is looking obsessive compulsive? What am I seeing? So make sure you step back and you ask yourself, can you see that? Because like people will say, well, they develop depression. Well, how might you see that? Okay, well, they're doing it to satisfy how do you see that? Okay, what behaviors are going on that would tell you that might be going on?